They are professionals in robbery. Before the action, they clean their bodies, ensuring no trace of skin is left at the scene. They wear bulletproof vests, put on rubber gloves, wipe the magazines with bleach, and make sure no fingerprints are left on the bullets. Fully armed and ready to rob the bank, they unexpectedly cross paths with a patrol car, and the air freezes in that moment, tension escalating. To their surprise, the police officer turns his head away, pretending he saw nothing. The robbers exchange knowing glances and, in perfect unison, drive off, sticking to the plan to break into the bank, take control of the employees who have just started their shifts, lock the doors, and make the hostages lie on the floor. Handing over their phones, the robbers place the phones into a glass tank, pour mineral water on them to prevent any calls for help, and then hold the bank manager hostage, forcing her to turn the combination lock. Under pressure from the robbers, the manager is nervous and fails several attempts to open it. Seeing this, the leader of the robbers takes her hand to comfort her. The manager regains her composure, breathes deeply, and quickly opens the vault. The robbers work in coordination to control the hostages. One pulls out the money with hidden trackers, fills the bag with the secure cash, and another pulls out the surveillance hard drive, placing it into the microwave to destroy the evidence. Suddenly, there's a knock on the door. The robbers immediately draw their guns, and the bank manager takes the chance to press the silent alarm button with her foot. But the leader of the robbers notices this. The hot-headed robber, enraged, strikes an elderly employee in the face with the butt of his gun. The leader steps in to stop them, only wanting the money, not to hurt anyone. In the scuffle, the manager catches a glimpse of a cartoon tattoo on the robber's neck, setting up a plot point for later. The robbers continue their heist, pouring bleach wherever they've been to ensure no trace is left behind. The plan is going smoothly, but someone has called the police. The hot-headed robber kidnaps the manager as a hostage, blindfolding her. While the robbers remove their airtight masks, they throw the manager on the beach, telling her to keep walking until the water reaches her ankles before she can turn back. Then, they burn their car. When the police arrive at the scene, they find no clues, indicating that professionals were behind the crime. The sheriff realizes that the old pros he knew are all in prison, and new blood must have taken their place. As the sheriff anticipated, the robbers are 4 young men, and they've run into trouble. The kidnapped bank manager, named Claire, lives just a few blocks away. They may run into her every day. James decides to follow Claire, ensuring not to be recognized, while Doug chooses to go alone. James has been in jail twice, and if he goes back, he won't come out. Claire has seen the tattoo on the robber's neck, but when giving her statement, she decides to hide it. She doesn't want to cause trouble for herself. Despite having no solid leads, the sheriff remains confident that the robbers will be caught. There are 300 to 400 bank robberies in Boston every year, and 90% of the robbers come from Charleston, the same town where Claire lives. It's a place with simple folk, and young people dream of becoming robbers. Doug's crew is undoubtedly the most successful up-and-coming group, but they're just the tip of the iceberg. The real mastermind behind everything is Fergus, a seemingly quiet florist. Doug starts trailing Claire to a laundromat. Claire is about to do her laundry, and he sits nearby observing. To his surprise, she strikes up a conversation. Claire asks him if he has any change, but Doug apologizes, and she decides to take her laundry home to hand wash. When she notices bloodstains on the collar, memories of her kidnapping flood back, and she can't help but tear up. Her vulnerable look deeply attracts Doug, and he approaches to comfort her. They begin to develop feelings for each other and start dating. Claire asks him how much he knows about bank robberies, since he grew up in Charleston and might know some of the robbers. Doug replies that many of the rumors are exaggerated. While some people glorify crime, he's different. He just wants to play hockey. As their relationship deepens, Claire opens up about her kidnapping experience. The robbers blindfolded her, drove her around, and finally left her on the beach, telling her to keep walking until the water reached her ankles. That was the longest walk of her life. Luckily, the robbers didn't harm her, but an older colleague was left blind in one eye after being beaten. He had just had surgery. It all happened because she triggered the alarm, and she feels guilty for not visiting him. Little does Claire know, the kind-hearted boyfriend by her side was one of the robbers who kidnapped her. Doug feels guilty too but keeps it hidden. So, he takes Claire to the hospital to visit the injured colleague. Of course, he has another motive, to test if the colleague can recognize him. When the colleague doesn't react, Doug leaves the room for Claire to spend time with him and chats with the police officer guarding the room. This officer is the same one who crossed paths with them earlier. Clearly, the officer doesn't recognize Doug as one of the robbers. After leaving the hospital, Claire confesses that she saw the tattoo on one of the robbers' necks but never told the police the truth. Doug starts analyzing the situation, realizing that the odds are in his favor. He says, "If you tell the police, most robbers have a criminal record, and they'll be caught soon enough, at least 30 years in prison, but their accomplices will come after you, and the police will put you in witness protection. You'll spend your whole life hiding." Doug advises Claire to think for herself and not reveal her ace too soon. As Doug drops Claire off at home, she mentions the series of bad things happening to her. After the bank robbery case was closed, someone damaged her car, and she had to walk a mile to catch the bus to work. But every time she passed an intersection, a group of thugs would harass her, starting with verbal abuse and eventually throwing glass bottles at her. Doug knows who the thugs are. He decides to do something for his beloved woman and asks James to help, though he doesn't explain why. Good friends, in perfect harmony, ready to fight to the death. On a dark, windy night, the two friends don masks, blocking the peephole with a baton, while one knocks on the door. When the man opens the door, he is struck in the face with a blunt object. The two rush into the room, immediately beating him mercilessly. Doug grabbed the bottle and slammed it hard on the thug's head, leaving a permanent scar on the back of his skull. James had never seen his best friend so enraged, but the real show was yet to come. Doug opened a bag of flour and scattered it on the floor, making sure the thug wouldn't dare call the cops. He then warned him to leave town within a week, or he'd get beaten every time they crossed paths. Of course, it was just a warning, but James took it seriously. He had no idea what the thug had done to anger his best friend, so he just pulled out his gun, shot him in both legs, then removed the mask to make sure the thug would remember his face. If he dared to report it, Doug would take his life. As they left, the two were silent. Doug regretted asking James for help. He didn't want to cause a death. James didn't care. He'd always been loyal to his brothers. The police were still tirelessly searching for clues. The robbers had disabled the alarm system, something only security company employees could manage. The investigation finally led them to a suspect. A young man named Desmond was highly suspicious. Every time he took leave, a robbery took place. Matching the timeline of 4 incidents, the police launched surveillance, and they now had full profiles on Doug and the others. Desmond was just 22 years old, a security company technician with no criminal record. Slane was exceptionally talented, a car thief who always stole a vehicle before a heist and torched it afterward to destroy the evidence. James had a fiery temper and was imprisoned for manslaughter at the age of 18. Doug, the leader, had once been a hockey player, but he was kicked off the team for fighting and drug abuse. He had also dated James's sister, and all of them were connected to Fergus. Additionally, Doug's father had once been Fergus's right-hand man. He had been sentenced to life imprisonment for robbing an armored car and killing 2 security guards. Although Doug had the suspects' details, there was still no evidence to charge them, so he had to wait for the next job to take them all down. Claire and Doug's relationship deepened, and they shared their loyalty to each other. Claire was melancholic about sunny days because her younger brother had died in such weather when he was very young, so every time the sun shone, it reminded her of death. Doug also had his own sad past. His mother had left when he was 10, and he hadn't seen her since. He couldn't even remember what she looked like. 2 lonely souls found warmth in each other, but Doug worried it would slip through his fingers. After all, he was a robber, and Claire was a hostage. But what was meant to happen, would. James's appearance left Doug feeling uncertain. From the 2-person combo meal, it was clear Doug was on a date, but he just wanted to leave as soon as possible, though it was already too late. When Claire returned from the bathroom, there was a stranger sitting at the table. James probably didn't expect Doug's date to be the bank manager, or maybe he already knew, which is why he showed up at the wrong time. James sat down with ease, talking about the brotherly bond between him and Doug. They'd known each other since they were 6, but Doug had never mentioned Claire. James said Doug was always secretive. James spoke at length, oblivious to the fact that Claire had seen the tattoo on his neck. Doug quickly grabbed James's neck to make sure Claire didn't see it. When they got home, James exploded in anger. He scolded Doug for choosing to date the one person who could identify them, the only witness who might recognize them. This would eventually lead to everyone's downfall, especially as they were preparing for the next heist. Doug strongly opposed wearing the bulletproof vest over the uniform, with the pant legs tucked into combat boots, looking like a retired Special Forces soldier. If they were to be counterattacked, there was no way they'd win. Doug wanted to wait, but James couldn't wait any longer. He'd been in prison for too long and just wanted to achieve financial freedom. Doug owed James too much, and finally agreed to the final heist before retiring. Before the heist, Doug visited his father in prison, knowing it might be their last chance to meet. Doug bravely asked why his father hadn't gone after his mother all these years. Stephen avoided the question, and the departure between father and son was anything but cordial. On the day of the heist, Slane hired someone to collect hair from a barber shop, washed the leather off his body, and took every precaution to leave no trace. They suited up in bulletproof gear, wore rubber gloves, and made sure no fingerprints were left on the bullets. Everything was ready, and they drove the stolen car straight to the credit union, targeting the armored truck that was withdrawing cash. Everyone had their tasks. Doug knocked out one security guard. James jumped into the truck to control another, smashed the lock with the butt of his gun, and stuffed stacks of cash into bags. Desmond was on perimeter duty, and Slane listened to the police communication channel on the getaway car. When someone reported the robbery, Slane turned around to see the driver was gone. The driver, holding Doug at gunpoint, thought the robbers would surrender, but James didn't play fair and shot the guard dead. Robbery was common in Boston, but when someone was killed, the police would relentlessly investigate. The group quickly drove away from the scene but were soon pursued by police cars. Realizing escape was impossible, James raised an automatic rifle and unloaded into the windshield. With heavy gunfire suppressing the officers, they had no choice but to duck for cover, and Doug seized the opportunity to reverse the car and escape down another street. But no matter how skilled Doug was at driving, he couldn't maneuver in such a narrow space. Soon, the police were back on their tail, and Slane arrived to assist. James got out of the car to engage the police in a shootout, while the others moved the cash and poured gasoline inside the car, setting it on fire to destroy the evidence. The exploding car blocked the path of the pursuing officers. The heist went smoothly. With no danger, they reached a safe area, scattered the collected hair in the car, and switched to another vehicle to leave the scene. This operation was just too professional. The police found no useful clues. The sheriff was furious and sent officers to arrest several suspects the next morning. Of course, they had no evidence. This was just an outlet for their frustration. What was even more infuriating was that the shot guard was still alive. Personally, the sheriff would have preferred him dead, so they could charge Doug with first-degree murder. But now, he had to watch as the criminals roamed free. The sheriff, unwilling to give up, reviewed the case files repeatedly. He suspected that Claire might be hiding something, so he called the bank to inquire again, only to learn that Claire had resigned. This only strengthened his belief that Claire might be the inside person. He ordered his subordinates to listen in on Claire's phone calls, determined to find a lead. Doug also realized it was time to pull back. He gave Claire a diamond necklace. There were things he couldn't say, but what he wanted to express was that he hoped to leave the town with Claire and start a new life somewhere no one knew them. However, Claire hesitated. She had read the local paper and saw that the thugs who had harassed her had been attacked. The paper mentioned one of them was shot. Although it didn't say who the shooter was, Claire had a feeling someone was looking out for her. Doug didn't admit it directly, but he made his stance clear. He didn't want to see Claire hurt. The thugs disrespected women, and it was karma that they got what they deserved. Claire, being kind-hearted, believed that karma shouldn't work like that. Doug's phone call with Claire was monitored, and the sheriff couldn't believe his ears. The hostage was in a relationship with the criminal. Either Claire was an accomplice, or Doug was using her. So, he decided to visit in person and revealed that the police had identified the suspects, testing her to see if she knew anything. When Claire saw Doug's photo, her heart shattered. What made matters worse was that she now faced accusations. The police had reason to suspect she was working with the robbers. James was planning another big heist, and Fergus had everything arranged, just waiting for Doug to join in. Doug was determined to quit. Besides, the police were already watching them. He advised James to be smart and not commit crimes in broad daylight, but James wasn't hearing it. The two got into a heated argument. After things settled down, James opened up about the past. 10 years ago, he had killed an enemy to help Doug, which led to a 9-year prison sentence. He didn't expect anything in return from Doug, but he wouldn't let him leave. Doug was deeply grateful for everything James had done for him. Since his father went to prison, it was James' family that had taken him in, but he was done with living by robbery. Only by leaving the town could he start over. He knew that trying to go solo was nearly impossible, so he went to the flower shop to ask Fergus for some money, considering it his exit fee. He did it to save face for Fergus, but to his surprise, Fergus didn't appreciate it. Doug immediately lost his temper, cursing Fergus as an old man past his prime, wondering why he should control his fate. What Doug didn't know was that the so-called washed-up old man wasn't as simple as he appeared. It was Fergus who had forced Doug's mother to hang herself with a wire all those years ago, and Doug had naively believed his mother left him and his father because of an affair. Fergus continued to threaten them, mentioning he had a beautiful girlfriend living in town. If they didn't help him with one last job, they could expect to collect her body. Doug rushed to Claire's house, where she had already figured out that he was the robber. She was heartbroken, tears long dried. Doug wanted to explain, but after all the lies, Claire could never believe him again. Still, she was deeply in love, so she didn't call the police, but she kicked Doug out. Doug, disheartened, fell back into old habits, buying contraband and hiding alone on an abandoned train to wallow in his misery. Then, in a fit of frustration, he fired his gun. When he returned home, he found a wreath at the door. It was a threat from Fergus. Doug made up his mind to break free from control, but first, he had to deal with the obstacle in his way. He went back to the flower shop and told Fergus he was in, but made it clear that if Fergus threatened Claire's life, he would burn the place down. Fergus laughed. "You're still too green to take me on." This time, the target was the weekly revenue of $3.5 million from the sports arena. The cash would only be released 15 minutes before the vault opened, which meant they had to strike at that moment and coordinate their plans. Little did they know, every move they made was being watched by the police. They donned police uniforms and arrived at the arena. Their informant opened the roll-up door for them, and they entered through the staff passage to the basement, relying on themselves for the rest. Using a cutting machine, they sliced through the steel door. Meanwhile, Desmond, disguised as an electrician, entered the distribution room by unlocking the iron gate. Slane, posing as an ambulance driver, kept the plan on track. Desmond called for the team to start the action and then unplugged the security camera cables. The screens went black, and they pretended to be responding to a robbery report, shouting and moving forward. The guard insisted no one had called, and the police, wearing sunglasses in the dim basement, made their presence suspicious. Before they could ask the police to show identification, Doug turned the tables and demanded they present their IDs and get on the ground. One guard instinctively reached for his gun, and the tension in the air escalated. But under the pressure of Doug and Jane's strong presence, the guard complied and got down on the ground. The two men successfully gained control of the situation, using zip ties to bind the security guards' hands, then covering their faces with black cloths as they approached the vault. Doug issued a warning, stating they had an accomplice watching the cashier's house. If they didn't open the vault, their families would suffer. Soon, the vault door opened. Doug entered, gun in hand, and found the table piled with cash. All old bills, no need to launder the money. The two quickly got to work, stuffing the cash into travel backpacks. This heist wasn't just worth $3.5 million. After placing the backpacks onto the trailer, they quickly left the scene, heading to the parking lot where the armored car was waiting to load the money. The driver, engrossed in the radio broadcast of a baseball game, was completely unaware of what was happening. Slane pulled up in the ambulance, waiting nearby. The group quickly loaded the money into the vehicle, then changed into paramedic uniforms, leaving the police outfits behind. So far, the heist had gone smoothly, but Doug had a nagging feeling that danger was looming. He looked around, sensing an eerie silence. His instincts told him something was wrong. As expected, a large group of police had surrounded the stadium. The police had received reliable information that a robbery was happening at the Red Sox's home stadium, but there were no signs of a crime. The sheriff surmised that either the robbery had already been completed or the criminals hadn't started yet, so he ordered the entire street to be cleared. The group had finished gathering the cash and was about to leave when they saw a flickering light at the end of the hallway. James raised his rifle and opened fire, shattering a mirror. The gunfire alerted the police outside. The sheriff led his team toward the source of the gunshots, and it seemed they had arrived at the right place. Gunfire continued to echo from the garage as the officers confirmed that their people were inside. The police hesitated to act, choosing to hold their position outside for the time being. Inside, the gun battle raged on, with both sides matching each other's firepower. However, the police had shields for cover and advanced while shooting, making the situation appear more favorable for them. To make matters worse, there were enemies ahead, firing from a hidden position. Slane was hit and fell to the ground, luckily wearing body armor, so the wound wasn't fatal. Doug scanned the area and realized the gunman was the armored car's security guard. While suppressing fire, Doug shouted for Desmond to open the large iron door. He charged forward, shoving the gun barrel into the back of the truck and firing repeatedly, forcing the guard to drive the armored car out of the parking lot. The police outside thought the criminals were trying to escape and fired upon the armored car, which lost control and crashed through the guardrail, tumbling into an abandoned junkyard. The group focused on dealing with the police, but the situation had turned against them. The police knew their numbers and uniforms, making it hard to break through. Doug pulled Desmond aside and suggested he surrender. He was still young and could get out after a few years in prison. No one would look down on him, but Desmond didn't want to go to jail. The police launched a surprise attack, throwing flashbang grenades toward the criminal's position. After a flash of light and a loud bang, their heads rang. Desmond slowly stood up, but was shot in the head before he could react. The police signaled to advance, and the criminals, seeing their friend die before their eyes, fought back, firing at the officers on both sides. James let out a furious scream, using heavy fire to keep the police at bay. But this was only temporary. They would eventually run out of ammo, and capture was inevitable. Slane decided to sacrifice himself, driving the ambulance out of the parking lot to give his friends a chance to escape. The police outside were swarming, and this move was essentially a death sentence. The sheriff shot out the tires, causing the vehicle to lose control. To avoid unnecessary casualties, a sniper took the shot, killing Slane instantly. The remaining two dragged the money bags to a corner and changed into police uniforms. The police had almost deployed every unit, with many officers not knowing each other. They were all too eager to claim credit, unaware that the criminals had infiltrated their ranks. The two managed to blend in, but the sheriff was no fool. He had heard about two robbers impersonating officers, and the scene was full of police officers. It seemed possible that the robbers had disguised themselves as cops to escape. The sheriff set off in a car, searching along the way, and eventually spotted James. He pulled over and followed the robber into a nearby parking garage, calling for backup. James wasn't ready to sit and wait for his end. He turned around and shot, catching the sheriff off guard. James, trapped and desperate, fled while reloading his magazine, but he was outnumbered, and soon the police had him surrounded. A bullet struck his leg, and he ran to a dumpster, continuing to fight with his handgun. Soon, he was out of ammo, and the police closed in from all sides. The sheriff shouted for him to surrender and drop his weapon within 30 seconds. James, unwilling to give in, picked up a drink from the ground, took a deep gulp, and at that moment, his reluctance to live was clear. After adjusting his breath, he picked up two empty guns and, in a tragic display, walked toward his end. Doug, not far away, watched the scene. He was different from James. He longed for freedom and didn't want to die in vain. He stashed his weapons and drove off in a police car, heading straight to the flower shop, where he unexpectedly shot and killed the bodyguard. Next, it was Fergus. They exchanged gunfire, but Doug, wearing a bulletproof vest, withstood the bullets and kept fighting. Fergus, now frail and weak, couldn't withstand such close-range gunfire. Doug approached slowly and fired a final shot to the heart, avenging his father's mutilation and reclaiming his own life. The police knew Doug would go to see Claire, so they had set up an ambush at her house. As expected, Doug called Claire to say goodbye, following the sheriff's instructions to meet her for the final time. Doug, hiding across the street at his uncle's house with binoculars, realized that Claire had, in fact, cooperated with the police. But he didn't blame Claire. This was something he owed her. If Claire wanted him to come, he would walk straight into the trap without hesitation. Doug felt sorry for what he had done and promised to come in half an hour. Just as he was about to hang up, Claire said something unexpected.
I really want to see you. It'll be just like one of my sunny days.
She had once told him she was afraid of sunny days because they reminded her of death. This was her way of sending a secret message, telling him not to come because it would be too dangerous. Doug smiled with relief. In that moment, their bond was elevated. Doug's uncle, a retired transportation worker, had given him some money. Doug changed into his uncle's uniform and quietly escaped from the roof without a sound. Half an hour later, the sheriff had not heard from the robbers. Realizing they weren't coming, he ordered his team to disband. In this game of cat and mouse, the clever mouse had won in the end. When everything had settled, Claire went to the garden to turn the soil as usual, but this time she unearthed a package. It was the $2 million Doug had left for her, along with a letter. He believed Claire would use the money for something beneficial to society, perhaps even more than he ever could. Additionally, in the letter, he wrote that he believed they would meet again, whether in this life or the next. Doug knew he hadn't misjudged her. In honor of Doug's mother, Claire donated the money to build a children's hockey rink in Charleston, fulfilling Doug's dream. With that, the film ended. I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.